Welcome to 15241 Today Talk. Our producer director Glenn Ward, our coordinating producer Linda Dudzitsky, and Jim Render and I are pleased to welcome to the show our Upper St. Clair golf coach Todd Flynn.
Thank you.
World history teacher at Upper St. Clair High School, and we're going to talk golf a little bit today, plus a whole host of other. And I do love golf. I do love the game of golf. What makes a good golf coach?
A good golf coach?
Yes.
What I do with the kids, with my players, I work with their minds, with their heads. Most of them see professionals, have their own teachers. If I see something glaring, I'll change it. But my job is, one, to make them gentlemen. You don't play for Upper St. Clair unless you are a gentleman. That's number one. Number two, the old risk reward. Young men always think that they can hit as far as, Brian DeChambeau now. No, you can't, son, and you don't need to hit it that far. Keep it in the fairway. So that's my job. And we've been, pretty darn course management. Our home course up there is the terrace course, and realistically, you don't need a driver. The driver's going to get you in trouble on a lot of holes. So it takes a while, but I finally have had seniors say, I'm going to do it your way today, Coach.
Do you think that being a golf coach is more similar or dissimilar to being a good teacher?
I would say similar. In the classroom, respect was very, very important between myself and students and between them. And that carries on to the golf course. And 99% of all golfers I've ever had have also been good students and leaders in the school. I could throw out a few names, but they're leaders today in their life. So it's something that carries with you, I think. It's the only game, it's the only sport where you can call a penalty on yourself. So that. And I had a young man lose the WPL individual championship calling a penalty on himself. He lost by a stroke. It was a situation, he hit his drive, and there were spectators there, and went over into the rough, and he walked down, and the spectator went, "There's your ball, son." So he looked at it, pulled the club out, hit it, got up on the green to mark his ball, picked it up and went, I hit the wrong ball. So he called a penalty, and he ended up losing the WPL championship by a stroke. So that says a lot about the sport and the game, but it also says a lot about a young man. Nobody would have ever known whether that was his ball or not, but yet he felt compelled to say, nope, I hit the wrong ball. So did I feel very bad for the kid? I did, but was I proud as heck of him?
Yes.
Yep, I couldn't wait to give him a hug and a kiss.
When did you start playing golf?
Well after I started teaching. I played football in high school and college, and never played then. I picked it up probably I was maybe 30. Yeah.
Speaking of football, I originally met Todd when I was the coach at Uniontown, and he was an assistant coach with Joe Moore here at Upper St. Clair. And he and another assistant, Fred Wickstrom, their job was to taunt me and get me riled up before the game. And they were good at it. Todd was an excellent football coach, very loyal to Joe.
He was the only coach we liked in the entire section. Joe said, that's the only one. If you ever met Joe, he talked like, he says, that's the only one I really like. He still believes that watered the field down before he came one game, because back in those days our field was horrible. Any rain and it would lay there for 2 or 3 days, and he had a heck of a team. Came up and walked onto the field, and it was like slosh. And to this day, he says, "You had fire trucks up here soaking that field down."
After I became the coach here, however, then I knew that field has a clay base, and it would only take so much water.
So this was before artificial turf?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, obviously, okay.
But that was also one of the reasons that we were able to finally convince the school board that we needed artificial surface, because it just didn't drain after a while,
Right.
because the clay wouldn't let it go anywhere.
Well, are there some points about coaching with Joe that you've been able to put into your coaching golf?
With Joe is a very unique individual. He taught you to believe in yourself, to believe in kids, to believe in your players, and you develop the bond. And I try to pass that on to golfers. You're out there by yourself. You've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in what you can do. Believe in your teammates. So yes, those things from Joe certainly carried on, and my own life, for things. We got things out of kids, as Jim will certainly say. We got things out of kids that you would never imagine possible. We had a 155-pound guard. Guards aren't usually 155 pounds, but.
You had some pretty good football players
We had
around them, too.
I'll never forget the first day Jeff Lanny came in. Joe looked down at his feet and said, "This kid's going to be a player."
By looking at his feet.
Jeff's feet were very big for his size as a freshman. And he said, "This kid's going to be a player." And, of course, he certainly was a player.
They also had Kirk Ferentz, who now is the head coach at Iowa.
And Kirk, when he was in high school, was just like he is today. He was a leader, a class guy. His wife is his high school sweetheart, and she is the sister of his best friend, Kevin. So yeah, and he was a player. Yeah, Kirk was definitely a player. He always had his forehead always had a huge lump on it. Try to tell him, "No, use your shoulder. Boom. He led with his head.
Then you left as a student. You graduated from Upper St. Clair, and then you went on to help start the tradition of Mount Union football.
I wouldn't say that, but interestingly enough, when I was a freshman, our quarterback was Larry Karras. He was a senior. And the head coach at the time, there were two seniors. One would play the first half, the other one would play the second half, no matter what was going on. And they would switch. One would start the game this week, then the next week the other one would start. But yes, Larry was a senior when I was a freshman, and I played for 2 years and got hurt. And then Larry was an assistant for a long time, became the head coach, and then started that onslaught of national championships. I think
Who was the head coach when you were there? Ken Wable?
Ken Wable, yeah. Yeah, he's now passed.
That just came to me.
Yep.
In those days, Wittenberg was a little more attuned to the top rung of that conference. But anyhow, I wasn't there, so. And then you came back to be a teacher at Upper St. Clair.
Correct.
And wasn't your dad a principal?
My dad was at one time elementary supervisor. He was principal at one time and then became elementary supervisor and then left and was the assistant superintendent at Baldwin. We lived for a year in Maryland, in Towson, Maryland, because he got a fellowship to the University of Maryland to start his doctor's degree, which you said, little story. I was in 7th grade, and in the summer, books would come in, and remember back in the day, the book had to be stamped, and then the kids would sign their name on the back cover. So I was stamping books, and he said to me, everything's locked up, but my PTA president is going to come and knock on the door. Let her in, and then come get me. So sure enough, an hour, he was in the back. An hour later, the knock on the door, and I went, opened the door, and she said, "Hi, I'm the PTA president." And I said, "Oh, come on in, ma'am." And she said, "My husband's with me." I went, Johnny Unitas. They lived right across the street from the school. And she was the PTA president. Of course, as a 7th grade, loving football, I was like an idiot. And then my dad walked around the corner. He had kind of set the whole thing up. And John handed me 2 tickets. And he said, "Would you like to go to a football game, son?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, yes." I remember it was against the Bears. If you remember, the old Baltimore Stadium was like a horseshoe. Mm-hmm. We were dead center, middle of that horseshoe, maybe 3 or 4 rows from the top, and it might have felt like it was 40 below zero. And my dad at halftime said, "Son, we can leave. If you're cold, we can leave." And I looked at him, "Leave? We're leaving." We stayed for the whole game. Yeah, but loved it. But yes, but I taught here my whole time.
When you graduated from here and then went on to Mount Union, were you at all obsessed about the fact that you wanted to be back here teaching in this school district?
No. Yes and no. I mean, I applied to Mount Lebanon. I applied to Bethel. I applied here. I actually got called from Bethel first, and they offered me a job. And I said, do I have 24 hours? Hoping that, St. Clair would call. And believe it or not, within like an hour, the phone rang again, and it was Upper St. Clair offering me a job. So I jumped at it.
What makes this such a great school district?
We have great kids. I think Jim will agree. I believe that if you have decent standards and goals, and you set them for the kids and let them go, they'll achieve it and go past it. If you look at Jim's record, my comment always was, you don't want to be the guy to follow Jim. You want to be the guy that follows that guy. Amazingly, the current coach, Mike, is doing it is a terrific. He was a terrific young man, student, player, and you can see it now in his coaching. And it comes from the top.
No, don't. This interview is about you.
Well, but it's you asked about what makes St. Clair. The kids. I was always very, very proud of our kids, and I would tell them. We had special needs kids. My real good friend, when he started, he had a special class. Never once in all my years did I see one of our students picking on or doing something that we would classify as bullying. I never saw that happen. And I complimented our kids, my students, and said, that's the way it's supposed to be. Somebody would say, well, how come we don't get points for our homework? And my comment always was, when you walk past a bank and you choose not to rob it, does the bank president come out and hand you a $50 bill? I said, no. And I said, why? And they said, well, because you're not supposed to rob a bank. And I said, that's right. And you're supposed to do your homework. And in time, that finally sinks in with them, that there are things you're supposed to do. But I think Jim will agree with me. We're blessed with great kids that want to achieve. And that's,
Well, that's very true. I've said the same thing many times. I used to say when I first got here in particular, if the Upper St. Clair kid gave you a commitment to play that sport, that was huge. And I used to say that a lot of our kids came from successful parents, in many cases competitive parents. So now when a young man came to football, and you used to coach football, if he made that commitment, you had a worker and you had a kid that cared. And so all your comments about great kids here, I think my career is also living proof to that in the amount of wonderful kids that I had.
On our state championship team, there was a young man there that played in the top 6 from the time he was a freshman. His father was a very good athlete at IUP. His mother was an All-American gymnast at IUP, so bloodlines he had it in him, but they were also both very successful people. If they thought their son, whatever, and they had 2 sons and a daughter that just graduated, all were golfers. And if they thought one of their children had done something wrong, it would have mortified them. And the young man, who's now in the Hall of Fame, is now like a friend to me. The phone rang one time. My wife has a routine when she answers the phone. If it's somebody she wants to talk to, she kind of meanders her way into the living room. If it isn't, it's a pretty quick conversation. Well, she answered the phone several years ago and meandered her way into the living room. And I wasn't really listening. Well, about 20 minutes later, she came out with her hand over the phone and said, "I know why you love this boy." It was Thomas.
Steve.
Yeah, it was one of my players, and wanted to know all about our trip because he knew I was excited. We were going on a cruise. He wanted to know how she liked it. But those are the type of kids we have. From that state championship team, Thomas went to Notre Dame. Grant Engel went to Ohio U and played 4 years. Corey Wilding is now a Navy SEAL. One went to College of Charleston, and the 5th senior went to Ohio State and played on their club team for 4 years. And they're all very, very successful young men right now in what they're doing. So, yeah, and we have good kids. And that's why I believe, and then if you take that part and give them extra goals, they're willing to do it. I have players right now playing today in the tournament, today and tomorrow in a 2-day tournament. And they play pretty much all summer, every day.
How do you make sure that you treat the poorer player as well as you do the best player on the team?
I'm very proud of this. Our assistant, before I left, we had a young man with Down syndrome come out for the team. And athletically, he couldn't make it. But Matt, the JV coach, said, "Coach, do you think it's okay if I keep him?" And I said, "I'm very proud of you." I said, "Absolutely." So he was on the team for 4 years. And got to play, Matt would take him in the cart with him, and after the kids all teed off, he'd play a few holes. So the ones that make the team, my job is to nurture them, to help them mentally prepare. Look, it's going to come. And as you well know, playing golf, there are a lot of peaks and valleys. And when you get the proverbial yips, it's hard to get through, and when you look in their faces, they say, "I'm sorry, Coach. Don't be sorry for me. You're not sorry for me. You're going to get through this." And I see that as my role. Something else that Jim knows. Mike Clark was at a presentation my kids were making. I'm going to say maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago, at our banquet, tradition is the seniors get to say something. So we had one senior that year, Tim Novak, and he said, "Coach, can I say something?" I said, "Absolutely. It's you. You're a senior." So he had started something that I knew nothing about, called Birdies for a Cause, and he knocked on people's doors. For every birdie I make, would you be interested in making a donation? And he chose, I forget the amount of money he raised, but it was significant for one person. And he chose and gave it to the Autism Society because he had a cousin who was autistic. Well, the next year, Tim's gone. One of the juniors said to me, "Coach, can I say something at the banquet?" And I said, "Well, traditionally it's just seniors." And he said, "You're going to like what I'm going to say." And I said, "Okay." He got up and gave a little speech, and he said, "In honor of our past captain, Tim, we're going to take it upon ourselves next year and continue the tradition of Birdies for a Cause." They're approaching $100,000 that they've raised. And each year the team tries to do better than what the kids did last year. So is that something to be proud of? Because I have nothing to do with it. It's all totally them. Mm-hmm. And Mike Clark was at 2 years ago. The young man we had with Down syndrome. The kids made the donation to the Down Syndrome Society, and Mike Clark happened to be there. And we talked for a while, and the kids came over and he said, "Can I talk to your kids?" I said, "Absolutely." So his comment to me before that was, years from now, they won't remember their record, but they'll remember this. So he was chit-chatting with them, and he said, "What was your record last year?" And he looked at me, and I went, "I don't know." I said, "You know what? I don't keep those things." And he said, "Sir, I'm not really sure." And Mike Clark looked at me with a big smile on his face and said, and then he said, "But you'll remember this." So, yeah, that as a head coach, that's what makes you happy.
There are a lot of great things about Upper St. Clair, including the fact that part of this community is the country club. And I know you play the Terrace 9, which is still a wonderful track to play, and fortunate that your team up there, and I suspect that the club treats you and that your team well.
I'll tell you how well they treat us. They don't charge us. And we're probably the only, maybe the only team in the WPL that doesn't have to pay per player for, even for practice. Other schools have to pay $12, $14, $15 per participant every time they're up there. So, that adds up. We've got boys varsity, boys JV, girls varsity, girls JV. That's a large sum of money that the school district and the athletic department was able to save on. So yes, they treat us very, very well. And it's, we get equipment through the club, but the members are all very, very nice. They're excited to see the kids play. They like to see the kids play. And it's, of course, we have to be on our P's and Q's too. Most golfers dress is proper, but I'm stickler for, and especially at the club, that shirt has to be tucked in.
Hats turned around the right way?
Well, if I see it backwards, it's mine. They get one warning when I pass them out, and then if I see it on sideways or backwards, it's gone.
I want to change venues a little bit here. As a history teacher at the high school, you started a program, as I recall, of honoring military veterans. And you used to have a day where you set up shop in the gymnasium and had artifacts, and you brought these men in and they gave little talks. You want to expound on that? And then I got another little.
The way this whole thing started, my wife and I and my mother and father were down at Station Square, and we were walking through the old shops, and a gentleman was walking towards us, and my dad was phenomenal with names. But this man is kind of looking at my dad's looking at him, and they smiled and we passed each other, and this gentleman maybe took 2 or 3 steps and said, "Bob?" And my dad snapped around and went, "Well, it is you, Jim." So, make a long story short, the women walked on. I forget the restaurant it was. We went in, he said, "Let's get a beer." And my dad had to go to the bathroom right away. So this gentleman looks at me and says, "Son, what's it feel like to be the son of a war hero?" And I went, "What?" I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "You don't know anything at all about your father?" And I said, "No." Well, the two of them shipped out from Station Square together the same day. And that's how they met each other, went through basic training in the Navy. And my dad was 17 years old and took the first wave ashore at Omaha Beach. Was a coxswain in the boat. His both parents were dead. You could be drafted. You obviously were drafted at 18. You could enlist at 17. He was 16, forged his birth certificate, went in and celebrated his 17th birthday, and 2 months later took the first wave ashore. So it was kind of that day I said, these kids aren't going to leave this school or leave my class without trying to find first family history. And if there was nobody in the family, finding somebody that was alive during World War II. It didn't have to necessarily be a soldier. It might be Rosie the Riveter. And the very first year, everybody had to do an interview and then turn the interview in. And the first year, the day that was due, somebody raised their hand and said, "Mr. Flynn, could I read this?" And I went, "Sure." Well, they read the interview. About half the class was crying. And then the next one said, "Well, can I read mine? Can I read mine?" And they found things out. For example, one young lady said she was born in the Philippines, and she said, "My grandmother was captured by the Japanese, escaped, and became a sniper." And she said, "But Mr. Flynn, you need to know, Granny is about this big." And then we went on then and had the big day. I think we did it 3 times. And the last one we had over 120 veterans there speaking and with the kids. But they enjoyed it, I think, as much as the kids and their parents did. There were a lot of bonds made between veterans and families. Once you said,
Well, as an offshoot of that, didn't you have a lot to do with planting the seeds for this memorial park that's in Upper St. Clair?
at the time, we were the only township around here that didn't have some type of monument memorial to veterans. So yes, I got it in my craw that we needed to do something. And ironically, Doug Watkins was the head commissioner at the time, and I went down and spoke with him, and he said, "I've been trying to get something going for years." He said, "I'd love nothing more, and we can both tell stories, and you can fact check them." But he looked out his window and said, "I'd love nothing more than to look out my window right there and see it." And that's where it now happens to be.
Sure.
And Jim, it was your wife. We made up a war bond. And it looked very similar to a war bond you would have bought during World War II. And you could buy it in honor of or posthumously. And Jim's wife did all the calligraphy for the names and everything. We sold them for $25. And the kids raised well over $5,000. And that became the seed money for the monument.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Todd Flynn, we're out of time. Jim and I really appreciate you being with us on the show. Congratulations to you and to Peggy and to your two children for your commitment that the entire family has, and your dad as well, you said was in education, the commitment that you've made to education and to Upper St. Clair. Great having you on the show.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
15241 Today Talk. Linda Dudzinski, our coordinating producer, Glenn Ward, our producer director. Thank you very much for joining us.